Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Arknights animation breakdown and reaction. Today we have Where the Vernal Winds Will Never Blow. This one is the CG one. This was voted on by the patrons on my Patreon because there was either this one or Holy Nightlight. I asked which to do first. This was the winner. I'll get to Holy Nightlight. I'm just starting here. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, shall we? Let's go. For how much these are hyped, they better be good. Ooh. That was a lot of particles. Uh, this whole thing has a lot of particles. I mean, it makes sense, right? You sand. Ooh, okay. That was cool. I like that. It's a good effect. Ooh. Okay. Wow, there was a lot to focus on in that set of shots. Ooh. Okay, leaves now. Oh, this song is kind of sick. I'm not focusing on that right now, though. It's just cool. No pun intended. So far, this is a lot of, like, effects stuff. A lot of it. Oh, that's cool. Sheesh. All right, that's a lot of effect stuff. Well, let's go and talk about it. All right, so the first thing, of course, I wanted to talk about all of these particles in this sand. This is some insane particle rendering action. I'm not entirely sure what program they're using to do all of this, but it is insanely clean. I can't really tell if this is a limitation of the 3D renderer of whatever program they're using that's just not quite getting all the fidelity and is making the sand and all the particles look a little bit more like white noise than actual sand, but you can see the movement in there. It's just a little bit awkward. It's still cool that there's this much attention to each individual particle when they could have just made it a fluid sim looking like particles. They do that a lot. It's very common. But at the same time, I can't really tell because it could just be the lighting. It could be an artifact of there being such low light that it's not able to individually light every single particle and have the light bounce between those particles. They probably don't have that level of fidelity for a shot export like this. So it's probably just a limitation of the shot, but it's still insane that you can see every single individual little tiny bit of particle that they put into this shot. Even if it does look a little bit chunky, it's still really cool, the fact that you can see how many individual particles are there. That's impressive for a shot like this. Nothing super big to talk about here. I just really like that transition of it now being on her back. I think that's super fun. And I just really like this shot compositionally. She's like basically dead center. It's really well focused. The camera's super smooth on the pan, which of course you could just do that in program. It's not that impressive, but I like the way it looks. Her color and everything is so striking against the more beige background, very dull colors being contrasted by very bright and vibrant colors, and then all of these particles floating around, really selling more of those particle effects. They spent a lot of time on rendering, I guarantee you. Particles are one of those things that are really difficult to render efficiently, so it's really impressive to me that they're putting all of this time into each of these renders to make sure that they have all of this fidelity, and it's really nice to have all this detail when they usually would just omit things like this, these little details, in order to save some time on the render. So I just wanted to go through this slide frame by frame because I noticed when watching that this was a 2D effect and it just looks really good. In the moment when I noticed it was 2D, I was like, oh, that's 2D and CG. That's not that distracting if done well. And the Arknights animation team have done that a few times. They use these 2D effects near the characters and as like direct response of the character acting on the environment, just because it's a little bit easier to add it in there. It's a little bit more fine-tunable compared to fussing around in CG a lot of the time. So efficiency, like we had just spoken about, this is one of those things that they do in order to save some time and effort, and it just looks really nice. I always appreciate when they do this sort of thing. This shot right here, you can see these spots in the background, these like giant shafts of falling sand. I assume this is doing what I was saying earlier about using fluid sims instead of full particle sims, because that's a lot of individual particles. That is millions of particles, and that would take so long to render. So I assume that they're using a fluid sim for at least the majority of that. Maybe they've got some particles floating around the outside to make it tie in a little bit better. That would make sense to me. But all in all, just saving a little bit of time by making huge walls of sand like that into a fluid sim and just coloring it slightly different, adding maybe a little bit of noise to the texture to make it feel more gritty is all you really need to do. And it's just one of those ways to save some time in the render process, and it looks just as good, especially for stuff in the background like this. I almost forgot entirely about this shot. This is a better shot of it. All this back here on this wall is definitely fluid sim. It's acting more like a raging river, so it's probably a little bit of smoke, a little bit of fluid, which a lot of sims for smoke are actually fluid sims as well. So it's very possible that they basically just made a brown waterfall and just put some particles around it to make it feel a little bit more dirty. Shots like these are more definitely just smoke sims because they just make a fog effectively and tint it a brown. That's what I would do personally. And a shot following like this is a little bit more on point of what you would see with a blend, because there are definitely some individual particles just of course around her face and everything and around her chest. There's a lot more actual particle effect going on here, but all of the other negative space around her is just kind of falling dust. So make some heavy smoke simulations and roll with it, basically. I wanted to go back to this sword reveal real quick, just because it's neat. It's super easy, but it's neat. You got the particles coming in, just kind of forming into the sword. That's pretty simple to do, just an inverse emitter. You just have everything sucking into one singular point, the big suck, if you will. And then all of the sword just being revealed via mask. The way in this shot especially, where you can almost see the sword forming a little bit in front of the actual sword, they probably had two different passes of this sword reveal, where it had the sword there, the sword not there. Then they basically made the sword reveal into a mask property that formed with the particles, very thin with very few particles emitting into it, and then revealed the actual sword onto another layer and just comped it all together. That probably sounded like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to the average person watching this, but just know that it's editing magic. That's all you gotta know. It's a really easy process, but if you don't really know the general process and if you're not seeing it, it might not be as easy to imagine. But basically, just a few layers of the same process with different effects added onto it, slapped together into a nice sandwich. Here I'm gonna highlight a few more of these really nice 2D effects. Super thin, super flowy. Really love the way that they add a little bit of pop to the scene. Not much else to talk about there, just fun, and I like talking about 2D stuff as a 2D animator myself. Now, this shatter was really cool, if not because of the shatter of the glass, the transition to her was super neat, having that masked by all these chunks of glass. This is CG glass is so cool to me because of the different unique ways you can handle it and add properties to it, take certain properties away, the thickness, the density. You can make it aberrate a little bit, you can make it affect the colors within the glass. And of course, with this shot, having the character appear in the glass is a super cool compositional thing. I've seen it done a few times, but this one is just really nice because it actually does kind of follow the trajectory of what might be going into the side of this glass here and projecting out into the piece to see it. Obviously, it would not be this clear, but I like that they're even putting in the effort to make it appear at the right angle within reason. There's always a little bit of smudge when it comes to using effects for something that looks kind of cool, but at very least they wait till it rotates instead of just having it flat, because that doesn't feel as right to the viewer. You're always expecting physics to work even in a world where they don't really make sense like this. And of course, it's this channel. We've got to talk about the impact. This one was just a really quick shot here. This is an uncommon impact where usually they're just kind of black and white voids. This one actually uses a little bit more texture on it. You can see some of this like flaking fractal texture in here is what it's called. It's a little bit more jagged, a little bit more jarring, a lot more energetic. And while anime and stuff like that will usually use something that has a lot of spikes on it for impact frames like that, this one leaves a lot of the color of the shot in it, which is pretty uncommon, and I really like it when they're using stuff like that in shots like this where there is color, even if it is minor color. And of course this one, which happens a few frames after, just same general process, same general color thing that I already mentioned. Lots of fractals happening here, very jagged. I like the blue shade that they add here because it transitions well out of the white into this purple that the character has in her design. I also really like this effect overall. This looks to be a blend of CG and 2D assets just kind of working in tandem to make things happen. Some of these swirls seem to be in 3D, but then a lot of these smaller effects seem to be in 2D. There was this swirl in the center of the screen about right here-ish, and it makes me happy. And this shot here, I don't really have much technically to speak about this one, but this was just really well done. I love this circle around. You can follow the character. You never lose sight of her, even though she's center of frame and getting surrounded by that icicle. It's just really cool. It's just, sometimes in animation, you don't need to have a super technical reason for stuff. The answer of it looked cool is all you need at times. And of course, because a major theme of this video is particle effects, this one is a smoke simulation. You can really tell that this is a smoke instead of a fluid because of the way that the volumetric light hits and reflects and absorbs. This sort of pluming that happens is very common with cloud work, and general dust storms like this utilize that sort of simulation. Just a lot of smoke. You can use fluid simulations for this, but they usually end up being a little bit more thin and not quite as puffy, I suppose, if you want to word it like that. A few of the following shots after this also have a lot of smoke, this one being another one, and you can, of course, see more of that light refraction and absorption and just scattering it all over the place. Subsurface scattering, for example, doesn't really happen because of the style of this animation being CG. The characters aren't meant to be perfectly human, so there's no subsurface light below the skin that is bouncing and spreading out under the skin, but you do get a lot of other diffusion of a lot of this light happening in here. You can see the light source all the way up here being like spread down in every direction, but it's being diffused and absorbed by all of the smoke and debris down below, and that's how you can more tell that it's a smoke sim usually than a fluid sim. That's not a perfect rule, don't quote me on it. There are exceptions and of course plenty of flexibility, but that's how you can more or less tell the difference. Usually fluid sims are a little bit more dense. I believe that this simulation happening here is actually a few different simulations stacked on top of each other. Another compositional trick here, where we have some smoke, we have some solids, and they're all just bursting from a point. There's a few particles in there. It seems to just be a multiple pass of different physics sims all coming from the same point, blowing apart the same invisible object that they then place into this shot to make it look so cool. There's a lot of flexibility and variability in physics sims, and I am not a professional at physics sims by any means. I get the gist of them, I know enough about them, but there are things like this where I couldn't tell you exactly what was happening and exactly what layers are being used because it's not necessarily my forte. But my guess would be multiple passes of the same sim with different properties on it: particles, smoke, solids. I don't know if there would be any liquid in there. Probably not. I'm assuming it's just those three. But you can definitely tell that there's those three in there purely by the texture on them. The amount of time that this shot probably took to simulate is absurd. There's smoke sim, there's solid physics sim, there's just everything. I think the only sim they don't have running here is maybe liquid. I'm seeing particles, I'm seeing solids, I'm seeing smoke. That probably took forever to export. It probably took forever to composite, depending on their workflow. That's a lot of effort. This is such a poster shot. This is the type of stuff that they like sell you to make a background for your computer. This is a beautiful set of shots here. I love the way that this looks. This might be one of those examples where they could be using a fluid sim instead of a smoke sim. With how much smoke is in the shot and rushing towards the camera the way it is, it's possible they composited it with like this first chunk here being a lot of fluid, and then they just kind of faded it into a more general smoke sim that was underneath everything and played around with the compositing a bit. It's hard to know unless you're in the room doing it yourself, but that it's a possibility. It's also possible they just used nothing but smoke sims there. I'm a 2D guy, not a CG guy, so a lot of these methods are kind of hard for me to feel confident on, because while I do know a lot of the stuff in a broad sense, getting down to the meat and bones like this can be a little bit difficult for me to handle, just because I know there's a lot I don't know about CG. Like, this shot is insane here. I love how much effect is happening here. I believe that this might be more compositing work than it is like in-engine CG rendering. I believe that this is probably something they did in the post process. I'm going to go with it's probably some 2D effects and compositing done after the main render of just the hand without anything happening was exported, and saving some time there. But I could be completely wrong. They have so much focus on a bunch of other shots in this project with a lot more rendering and simulation than I thought. So it wouldn't be exactly against their habits here to do a lot more work for a shot that could be done a little bit easier maybe in compositing. And there's not really much to say about this one, but just how sick is this shot? There is so much cool in this one shot. I wish I was as cool as this shot. I have nothing else to say about it. It's just cool. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you all for watching. I hope you had a good time with me breaking down all of the insane particle work that was happening in there. There were so many physics sims going on. I had a hard time trying to explain all of them, and I'm sure a lot of it won't actually make it into the final video. But if you like this and you want to see more of them, by all means, follow me and etc. You know how to do all of that, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!